Welcome to our channel. There are moments in life when the world seems to close in on us, when circumstances overwhelm us, and the path ahead is clouded in uncertainty. In those moments, we find ourselves facing a painful truth. We cannot change the situation. No matter how hard we try, some things are beyond our control. But in the words of Viktor Frankl, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. This is the journey of a woman named Claire, who, like so many of us, came to a crossroads where the only way forward was not to change her circumstances, but to change herself. Her story is not one of grand victories or miraculous escapes. It is the story of someone learning to embrace the power of inner transformation, even in the face of unyielding pain. Join me now as we walk with Claire through a life marked by hardship, resilience, and the quiet strength that comes from the courage to change within. Her name was Claire Bennett, born in the gentle hills of Vermont, where the winters were long and the silence between snowfalls taught her to listen to the quiet things. From a young age, Claire understood pain, not the kind you scream about, but the kind that settles into the bones and stays. Her father left when she was 5. Her mother never fully returned from the heartbreak. Claire learned early to comfort herself, to make tea for a crying woman, to button her own coat when no one else would. By the time she turned 16, she'd already decided life owed her nothing, and she would expect nothing in return. But buried deep inside her, beneath the calluses of resilience, lived a silent longing for love, for peace, for a moment when she could simply be a girl, not a soldier. She excelled at school, not because she was brilliant, but because it was the only battlefield she could control. She read psychology books before bed, and one night stumbled on a quote by Viktor Frankl: "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." It stayed with her like a secret vow, though she didn't understand it then. Years later, Claire moved to New York City with 2 suitcases and a scholarship. She was 21 and full of sharp edges. The city didn't soften her. If anything, it mirrored her own intensity. She studied behavioral science, drawn not to fix others, but to understand why she herself felt broken. She worked 2 jobs, slept 4 hours a night, and never missed a deadline. People admired her. Her professors called her exceptional. Her peers called her unstoppable. But no one knew she cried in bathroom stalls or sat in subway cars long after her stop, just to feel unseen. Then came the fire. Not a literal one, but a metaphorical blaze that burned everything she thought she was. Her mother was diagnosed with early-onset dementia. Claire, at 25, had to become the caregiver for a woman who once couldn't care for her. Her job at the research center asked her to choose: stay and build your career, or go and care for your mother. She went, not out of duty, but because something inside her whispered, "You can't run from pain forever." Vermont hadn't changed. The same hills, the same silence. But Claire had. At first, she resented everything: the smell of her childhood home, the way the clocks ticked too loudly, the way her mother sometimes looked at her like a stranger. There were days Claire screamed into pillows. There were nights she drank tea alone at 3 a.m., whispering Viktor Frankl's words to the darkness. We are challenged to change ourselves. But how? What did change even mean when the world stayed the same? Then one morning, Claire noticed something. Her mother was humming, a soft, broken tune. And though her eyes were distant, her hands reached for Claire's face as if trying to remember her. Claire didn't cry. She just held the hand. That moment became the first of many small changes. Not in her mother, but in Claire. She stopped expecting clarity. She began finding beauty in the fog. She learned to smile through confusion, to cherish the lucid moments, to forgive the ones that slipped away. She started journaling, at first clinically, like a researcher. But slowly her writing softened. It became a love letter to grief, a witness to her own unfolding. Claire joined a caregiver support group. She listened to other stories and in them heard echoes of her own. She was no longer alone. She began painting again, something she hadn't done since she was 13. Not for galleries, just for the joy of watching colors bleed together. She painted pain in strokes of red and healing in shades of gold. She found that in surrender, there was strength. In letting go of who she thought she had to be, she discovered who she truly was. Claire no longer tried to control every outcome. She learned to sit in uncertainty, to breathe when she wanted to run, to love even when love meant watching someone forget your name. And then one spring evening, sitting on the porch with her mother asleep beside her, Claire whispered to the stars, "I get it now, Dr. Frankl. The situation won't change, but I can." And she did. Not all at once, not dramatically, but day by day, moment by moment. The war inside her began to quiet, and in that stillness, Claire finally heard the voice she'd silenced for years, her own. Spring rolled into summer and the days grew longer, but time with her mother grew shorter. The illness moved like a slow, invisible tide, erasing memories, rearranging moments, softening even the sharpest days. Claire no longer tried to resist it. She had learned that resistance made grief louder, so she leaned into presence instead. Each morning became a ritual. She brewed coffee for herself, chamomile for her mother. She played old records, her mother's favorites from the 60s. Sometimes on good days, they danced slowly in the kitchen, barefoot on the faded tiles. Her mother would laugh, not because she remembered the song, but because she felt safe. Claire realized something profound in those dances. Memory is not the only way we stay connected. Presence is just as powerful. She stopped needing her mother to remember. She started needing only to love. That shift, though quiet, restructured her. She began applying this grace to herself. When her hands trembled from exhaustion, she forgave them. When she woke up anxious, she didn't fight it. She named it. She sat with it. She let it pass. One evening, she found herself reading Frankl again, this time not to understand pain, but to companion it. His words no longer felt like ideas. They felt like mirrors. She underlined a sentence in man's search for meaning. Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. Claire wept, not because she was sad, but because she finally knew what it meant to choose. And she chose presence. She chose love. She chose to stop running from the fire and instead become the woman who walks through it with her head held high. Her friends from the city called sometimes, asked when she was coming back. She didn't have an answer. New York felt like a different lifetime. She didn't miss the rush. She missed herself more. In Vermont, she had found pieces of her soul she never knew were missing. She began volunteering at the local hospice center on weekends, helping others walk through the same grief she had learned to sit beside. She listened more than she spoke. She held hands that were trembling. She offered silence when words were too heavy. And every time someone thanked her, she smiled gently, knowing it was not her strength they saw, but the result of surrender. One morning, her mother forgot her name completely. She looked into Claire's eyes and asked, "Who are you?" Claire didn't cry. She answered softly, "I'm someone who loves you." And her mother smiled like she understood something deeper than names. That day, Claire realized, identity is not in the memory of others. It's in how we choose to show up. She wrote it in her journal that night. "She may forget my name, but I will not forget who I've become because of her." In the stillness of rural life, Claire grew in ways the city never demanded. She learned the rhythm of healing, not a sprint, not even a walk, but a surrender, a leaning, a becoming. Autumn arrived with quiet footsteps, brushing the hills in shades of amber and rust. The trees let go of their leaves without resistance, and Claire took notice. Nature, she thought, doesn't fight the falling. So why should I? She started walking every morning, just as the fog lifted from the fields. There was something sacred about the stillness before the world stirred. It reminded her that clarity comes slowly, often after silence. She no longer needed to rush through life. She had learned that survival is not about speed, but about depth. Her mother's condition worsened in soft, irreversible ways. Words became scarce. Recognition faded. But love stayed. It lived in the warmth of a touch, the rhythm of shared breath, the unspoken bond between two souls who had journeyed through darkness together. Claire began speaking to her mother even when there were no replies. She read poetry aloud. She shared stories from their past, even if only one heart remembered them. And somewhere in the middle of one of those stories, she realized something. She was no longer telling them for her mother. She was telling them for herself, to remember who she had been, to anchor who she was becoming. Her grief no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a doorway, a passage into a deeper, wiser self she hadn't known existed. She found herself reaching for people differently now, with softness, with patience. She called an old friend she hadn't spoken to in years, just to say, "I forgive you." She didn't need an apology. She only needed to stop carrying things that no longer fit inside the person she was becoming. That winter, her mother passed away. It was quiet, like snowfall, like a candle's final flicker. Claire sat beside her until the room grew still. She didn't scream. She didn't break. She simply held her mother's hand and whispered, "Thank you." Because even in death, her mother had given her a gift, the gift of transformation, of rediscovering the strength that lives not in what we control, but in how we surrender. Claire grieved honestly. She didn't hide from the ache. She let it come. And when it came, she didn't ask it to leave. She just made room. People in town brought food, sent cards, stopped her in grocery aisles to say, she was a beautiful soul. Claire always nodded, smiled, and whispered, she still is. Because love doesn't vanish. It only changes shape. She stayed in Vermont for 6 more months, cleared out the house one drawer at a time, not rushing. Every item was a memory, every photograph a breath from the past. And when the last box was sealed, Claire stood in the empty living room, hands at her sides, and said aloud, "I'm ready." She didn't know what for, only that she was no longer who she used to be, and that was enough to begin again. Claire moved back to the city, but not the same city. Not New York, not the endless grind she once worshipped. She chose Portland, not because it was smaller, but because it felt quieter inside. She rented a modest apartment above a bookstore with creaky wooden floors and a window that faced the sunrise. She took a job at a counseling center, not as a therapist, not yet, but as a program assistant. She listened more than she spoke. She observed pain like an old friend. She recognized it in the slouched shoulders of a teenage boy, in the shaky voice of a single mother, in the silence of a man who had lost everything and still showed up. Every day she walked into that building with one quiet intention: hold space. She didn't try to fix. She didn't preach. She simply showed up again and again, and people felt it. Because when you have walked through fire, others can feel the warmth you carry. At night, Claire wrote, not for school, not for deadlines, not to prove anything. She wrote because her soul had stories to tell. She wrote about grief, about resilience, about the quiet places where transformation begins. She wrote in first person, but every word was for someone else, someone still in the middle of their pain. Sometimes she cried while writing, but not out of sorrow, out of gratitude for having survived, for having softened, for having changed not the world but herself. And that, she now knew, was enough. One evening, after a long day at the center, Claire sat on her rooftop watching the city lights flicker like nervous stars. She held a warm mug between her hands, and for the first time in years, she realized she was not waiting for anything, not waiting for someone to arrive, not for the pain to stop, not for the past to be rewritten. She was simply there, alive, awake, and at peace. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like stillness. And in that stillness, she heard something, her own breath, steady and quiet. That's when she understood. Healing is not a destination. It's a way of walking. It's waking up every day and choosing presence, choosing courage when it would be easier to shut down, choosing softness when the world tells you to harden. Claire didn't need to be brave every second. She just needed to keep showing up, and she did, again and again, through seasons, through shadows, through the slow, patient unfolding of becoming. Spring found Claire again, not just outside, but within. The snow melted slowly that year, like sorrow softening into understanding. One morning at the center, her supervisor handed her a folder. Inside was an application for a new community therapy initiative. "You should lead this," he said. "You've lived what most of us only read about." Claire hesitated. The old voice crept in. "Who are you to lead?" But then another voice, gentler, wiser. "You are someone who walked through darkness and didn't close your eyes." So she said yes, not out of pride, but out of readiness. The program focused on narrative healing, inviting people to tell their stories out loud. Each week, Claire sat in a circle of wounded strangers and said, "You don't need to be fixed. You need to be heard." And slowly they spoke. Addicts, survivors, widows, runaways. Each story was a thread, and Claire wove them into something whole. She didn't offer advice. She offered space, and that, it turned out, was the rarest gift. One night, a teenage girl in the group said, "I didn't think anyone would understand what it feels like to lose your mom before she's really gone." Claire didn't respond with facts. She reached out, touched her hand, and said, "I do." And that was enough. It always had been. That summer, Claire began speaking at conferences, not as an expert, as a witness. She stood in front of rooms filled with strangers and said, "You are not weak because you feel lost. You are human." And in every nod, every tear, she saw herself. Not the version who ran from pain, the one who walked into it and came out softer. Years passed. Claire didn't become famous. She didn't write bestsellers. But she built something better, a life rooted in truth. She married quietly, a kind man who didn't try to save her, only walked beside her. They didn't speak in grand declarations. They held hands in silence. He knew about her past. He honored it. They adopted a child, a quiet girl who had seen too much too soon. Claire held her like someone once held her mother, with grace, with patience, with love that didn't need to be earned. At night, Claire would tuck her in and whisper, "You are safe now." And she meant it, because Claire had become the home she once needed. One rainy afternoon, decades after the porch sit with her mother, Claire stood at the window as her daughter painted quietly. She picked up her old journal and read the entry from long ago. "The situation won't change, but I can." She smiled. She had, not into someone perfect, but into someone present, someone whole, someone free. That evening, as she watched the sky turn from gold to indigo, she wrote her final entry. "When I could no longer change what was happening to me, I changed who I became inside it. And that became the most beautiful thing of all." And with that, the story was not over. It was simply complete, because Claire had become not the girl who endured, but the woman who transformed. Claire's journey is not just her own. It is the silent battle carried by countless people who wake up each day to face a reality they did not choose. But what her story teaches us, what Viktor Frankl reminded us, is this: when we can no longer change what's outside of us, we are invited to change what's within. That is not weakness, that is power. To adapt without losing ourselves, to hurt without becoming bitter, to grow not because life was kind, but because we chose to keep going anyway. And in doing so, we discover the deepest kind of strength, the kind no one can see, but everyone can feel. So if you too are standing in a place where nothing around you makes sense, remember this: you may not be able to change the storm, but you can become the one who learns to stand in the rain and still rise. Thank you for spending your time with us today. If you found value in this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to us and helps us continue creating meaningful content for you. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. See you in the next video.